I thought we'd take a break from my magical history tour series of episodes where I take a year and just kind of explode it and talk about a lot of the great music that came out in that year. Because in this episode, we're going to go back and just focus on one band. Now, they were only active from 69 to 72, but whoa, were they a force to be reckoned with. In that period, they recorded 6 albums. 4 of them were monster hits. They had 5 number 2 hit singles without ever having a number 1 hit single. They played Woodstock, but like so many classic bands of that era, infighting drove them apart. And as a result, they sued each other, and it was ugly for a number of years. Interestingly enough, just now as I'm recording this, they have released an album that they recorded back in 1970. So I guess you could say they're still active. Now, they started as the Gollywogs. That didn't really go anywhere. So, all right, you ready? Let's go down on the bayou. I think there's a bad moon rising, and let's check out Creedence Clearwater Revival. Let's drop that needle. As I said, they started as the Gollywogs, but in 1967 they decided to change the name to Creedence Clearwater Revival. Now, the original lineup was John Fogerty, a songwriter, singer, lead guitarist, his brother Tom on rhythm guitar, Stu Cook on bass, and Doug Clifford on drums. In 1968, they released their first album, Creedence Clearwater Revival, which was not very well received critically, but it did spawn a monster hit, the 8.5-minute Susie Q. I Put a Spell on You, Working Man, and 99.5 Won't Do. The album, it sold, but it did establish the new band. And in 1969, they toured extensively, and in that year, recorded 3 albums. First up is Bayou Country, with the great leadoff song, Born on the Bayou. Then there's the unforgettable Proud Mary and Keep on Chooglin'. It soars to number 7 on the charts. Just a few months later, in August of 1969, they released their 3rd studio album, Green River. Great songs here are the leadoff, Green River, Commotion, and the 2 big hits, Bad Moon Rising and Lodi. And in 1969, they also played Woodstock. Now, this was a very busy band in 1969. As I said, not only were they touring, but they released 3 albums, and their 3rd one was the big hit, Willie and the Poor Boys. It has the great leadoff track, Down on the Corner, the smash hit, Fortunate Son, and even their take on the Midnight Special. They follow this up just a few months later in 1970 with the album Cosmo's Factory, and the hits just keep coming. We get Travelin' Band, Looking Out My Back Door, Run Through the Jungle, Up Around the Bend, Who Will Stop the Rain, and Long as I Can See the Light. That same year in 1970, they release an album called Pendulum. It contains the hits Have You Ever Seen the Rain and Hey Tonight. And on the back of all these hits, singles, and hit albums, they tour the world to massive crowds. But by 1972, the band was in rough times, and it was starting to unravel. Tom Fogerty had left the group, so then the band decides to continue on as a trio. But tensions had been simmering for quite some time, and now they start to boil over. Stu Cook and Doug Clifford think that John Fogerty has way too much control of the band, and so they demand that they be able to write songs for the new album. So they do, and the album is called Mardi Gras. But the songs they write are not that special and don't really have the Creedence feel to them. Check out Fogerty's Someday Never Comes and Sweet Hitchhiker. And then to get a feel for the rest of the album, there is Cook's Take It Like a Friend and Clifford's What Are You Gonna Do? They briefly toured to support this album, but the tensions were just too great and the band broke up. But in their run, Creedence had recorded 7 albums in 5 years with a slew of hits. As I say, they were a force to be reckoned with. But now they were over, and John Fogerty decides to go off and start a solo career. But the other two, Stu and Doug, decide, well, let's just keep the band alive. and we'll call it Creedence Clearwater Revival. Up comes a lawsuit. Fogerty sues them for that, saying they can't do that. So they hire a new guy to play and kind of take Fogerty's place, but now they got to change the name of the band to Creedence Clearwater Revisited. As I said, John Fogerty decided to go as a solo artist, and in 1973 he releases his first album called the Blue Ridge Rangers. Now actually, it's not really a band in that Fogerty plays all of the instruments on the album. And there are no new songs. All are country covers. You get Jambalaya on the Bayou, She Still Thinks I Care, Working on a Building, Please Help Me I'm Falling, and Hearts of Stone. The album is pretty well received. But John has a problem. The album is released by Fantasy Records, the label that Creedence worked for. And Fantasy demands that Fogerty has to honor the contract that they had with Creedence, and he has to release 8 more albums for Fantasy. Fogerty refuses and doesn't record anything for 2 years. In 1975, he's signed with a new label and he releases an album just called John Fogerty. It contains Rockin' All Over the World, Lonely Teardrop, and Sea Cruise. John took 10 years off, but his next album is a solid home run. Released in 1985, it contains the massive hits The Old Man Down the Road, Rock and Roll Girls, and Centerfield. He went on tour to support this album, and people were really excited to see him, but he got very mixed reviews because he decided he was still angry and fighting with Creedence Clearwater Revival, so he didn't include any of the songs from his back catalog. Now, I think there's a lesson to be learned here. Now, I get it. If you're an artist and you've been in a band, and the band has been successful, and then you want to go solo, you want to make a break, you want to establish yourself. But your audience will come and see you, but they want to hear the stuff that they remember that you did as well. Well, Fogerty didn't do that. And you know, a couple of the Beatles didn't do it. George Harrison, when he went on the Dark Horse tour, he was adamant he wasn't going to play any Beatles songs. And even McCartney, when he started Wings, would not play any Beatles songs until a few years later he decided, the audience wants to hear that stuff. And when I play it, they go nuts. I don't know. I think as an artist, yeah, you want to be an individual, but when you've got such a great back catalog, I think probably you owe it to your audience to include it. But hey, that's just my 2 cents. John's been very busy. He's continued to record. And between 1986 and 2020, he's recorded 7 albums. They are Eye of the Zombie, Blue Moon Swamp, Deja Vu All Over Again, Revival, The Blue Ridge Rangers Ride Again, Wrote a Song for Everyone, and Fogerty's Factory. And in 2015, John Fogerty releases an autobiography called Fortunate Son. Now, as for his brother Tom Fogerty, after he left Creedence, he went on for a solo career as well, and he recorded 7 solo albums between 72 and 99. They are Tom Fogerty, Excalibur, Zephyr Nation, Myopia, Deal It Out, Sidekicks, and the very best of Tom Fogerty. Now, those last 2 albums were released after he had died. Tom Fogerty passed away in 1990. As for Doug and Stu, well, they soldiered on and continued to fight with the lawsuits with Fogerty, but they became eventually, as I said, Creedence Clearwater Revisited, and as such, they continued to tour and record live albums until just recently. Here's a bit of interesting trivia about Creedence Clearwater Revival. You remember at the beginning of the episode, I said that they had just now, in September 2022, released a new live album from their historic performance at the Royal Albert Hall in 1970 in London. But hang on a minute. I've had this album since 1980, and it's Creedence Clearwater Revival live at Royal Albert Hall. Now, when you read the press releases for the new album coming out and the documentary that's going with it, they make a big point about how these tapes have been lost for over 50 years, and that now you'll finally get to hear that amazing concert. Well, hang on. What's this then? Well, it turns out that this album was actually not recorded in London, it was recorded in Oakland, California. Now, when Fantasy Records discovered their mistake, they re-released the album calling it The Concert, which means that the album I'm holding is now a collector's item. So, what's the difference between this and the new album? Well, they're recorded in different continents, they're different concerts, and they have a different lineup. Now, the new album I'm sure will be great. Haven't had a chance to listen to it yet. The documentary I'm looking forward to. But here's an interesting side note. That new album, when they did play Albert Hall, was recorded April the 14th, 1970. Now that was just 4 days after Paul McCartney announced to the world that he was quitting the Beatles. I wonder if when Creedence walked out on stage that night to the great response from the audience, if they thought maybe history was passing the baton from the Beatles to Creedence. So that's the story of Creedence Clearwater Revival. Wow, what a band. And we're still getting new stuff. We get this new album coming out, the documentary. Fogerty continues to tour and record. Pretty amazing stuff. And another little interesting story that I want to mention is, I mentioned the fact that Fogerty would not play Creedence Clearwater songs for a number of years, but that changed one night when a friend of his said to him, John, if you don't go out stage and play one song, everybody in the world is going to believe that Proud Mary was written by Tina Turner. So he started playing Proud Mary in his sets. The power of rock and roll. Thanks for watching, and as Creedence would say, keep on chugging. See you next time. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.